March 3rd, 1945. Near the German border. The snow had stopped falling hours ago, but nobody in the American camp seemed to notice. Private Daniel Mercer stood beside a smoking field kitchen, staring into an empty pot. There was nothing left. No stew. No bread. No coffee. Nothing. Around him, hundreds of exhausted American soldiers sat silently beneath torn canvas shelters. Some rubbed their hands together. Some stared into the frozen mud. Others simply lay down and conserved what little energy they had left. 3 days. 3 entire days without a proper meal. Nobody understood how it had happened. The supply convoy had vanished somewhere behind the front. Roads were clogged. Bridges were destroyed. Communications were failing. And now an entire combat unit was slowly starving while the war continued moving around them. What happens if the trucks don't come today? A young soldier asked. Nobody answered. Because everyone was wondering the same thing. The silence felt heavier than the cold. And before sunset, something happened that would send a report racing through the American chain of command, straight toward General George S. Patton himself. The trouble began when Sergeant Michael Reeves noticed movement near the perimeter fence. At first he thought they were civilians. Then he realized they were German prisoners. 30 of them, captured weeks earlier. Thin, dirty, exhausted. Yet somehow they looked no worse than the Americans guarding them. That realization made Reeves uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Get Lieutenant Harris, he said. Minutes later, Harris arrived. What is it? Reeves pointed. The lieutenant stared. The prisoners sat quietly beside their barracks. Not complaining. Not shouting. Just waiting. One of them slowly pulled a piece of bread from his pocket. Another shared a potato. Several others produced small pieces of food they had secretly saved. The American soldiers nearby watched every movement. Every bite. Every chew. Nobody spoke. The hunger was becoming impossible to ignore. Corporal Nathan Brooks swallowed hard. I can't stop looking. Neither can I, another soldier admitted. The room inside Harris's head felt suddenly crowded. His men were starving. Yet the prisoners somehow still had food. Not much, but more than the Americans. That fact alone felt wrong. Word spread through the camp within an hour. By evening, frustration was everywhere. They're prisoners. So, we captured them. I know. Then why do they eat while we don't? Nobody had a good answer. Military regulations required prisoners to receive rations. Even during shortages. Especially during shortages. America followed rules. America followed conventions. America followed standards. But standards felt harder to respect when your stomach hadn't felt full in days. The arguments grew louder. A few soldiers demanded the prisoners' food be confiscated. Others disagreed. Tempers rose. Hunger sharpened everything. Every word. Every glance. Every decision. Captain Robert Fletcher arrived shortly after dark. He listened quietly as officers explained the situation. Then he walked toward the prisoner compound. A translator named Carl Weber accompanied him. The prisoners stood as Fletcher entered. Several looked nervous. One older German prisoner stepped forward. His name was Otto Klein. Before the translator could speak, Otto reached into his coat. American guards instantly raised their rifles. The German froze. Slowly, carefully, he removed a cloth bundle. Inside were 6 potatoes. Nothing more. The old prisoner held them out. Fletcher frowned. What is this? Carl translated. Otto answered softly. The translator looked surprised. He says these are for your men. The camp went silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The wind itself seemed to stop. What did he say? He says your soldiers need them more than we do. Several Americans stared in disbelief. Others looked away. One private suddenly felt ashamed of every angry thought he'd had all afternoon. But not everyone felt that way. Sergeant Reeves crossed his arms. That's 6. Potatoes. Yes. We have hundreds of hungry men. Yes. This changes nothing. Maybe he was right. But something had changed. Because now the situation was no longer about food. It was about people. The story continued climbing upward through command channels. First to battalion headquarters. Then division headquarters. Then higher. Each officer reading the report paused at the same sentence. American soldiers starving. German prisoners offering food. The contrast was impossible to ignore. 2 days later, General George Patton arrived. No announcement. No ceremony. No warning. One moment the camp was quiet. The next, word spread. Patton's here. Men stood immediately. Officers adjusted uniforms. Conversation stopped. Even the prisoners noticed the sudden change. Patton stepped from his vehicle and surveyed the camp. Mud, snow, exhaustion, hunger, faces that looked older than they should have. He said nothing. At first, he simply walked, past tents, past vehicles, past soldiers, observing, listening, measuring. Everyone waited. Finally, he stopped beside Captain Fletcher. Tell me exactly what's happened. His voice remained calm. That somehow made everyone more nervous. Fletcher explained everything. The missing supplies, the starvation, the prisoners, the potatoes, the arguments, the growing tension. Patton listened without interruption. When the explanation ended, nobody spoke. The general looked toward the prisoner compound, then toward his own men, then back again. The silence stretched. Finally, Patton began walking, straight toward the German prisoners. American soldiers followed. Officers followed. Even medics drifted closer. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. Patton stopped in front of Otto Klein. The elderly German stood at attention. His hands trembled. The translator moved beside them. Patton looked directly at him. You offered food? The translator repeated the question. Otto nodded. Why? The answer came quietly. Karl translated. He says hunger looks the same in every language. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. For several seconds, the camp became completely silent. Patton stared at the old prisoner, then at the surrounding Germans, then at the Americans watching nearby. His face revealed nothing. A young lieutenant later admitted it was the longest silence he had ever experienced. Finally, Patton spoke. How many potatoes did you give away? The translator asked. Otto answered. 6. Patton nodded slowly. Then he turned toward his officers. How many trucks are on their way? 3 supply convoys, sir. When do they arrive? Possibly tonight. Possibly. Yes, sir. Patton's eyes narrowed. The officer swallowed hard. Everyone knew what that look meant. The general paused. Then something unexpected happened. He pointed toward the prisoner compound. When the food arrives, nobody interrupted. When the food arrives, those men eat first. Shock spread across dozens of faces. Even the translator looked stunned. The officer blinked. Sir. Patton looked at him. His voice remained calm, dangerously calm. Those prisoners chose humanity while hungry. Nobody spoke. Patton continued. My soldiers are expected to do the right thing. His gaze shifted toward the Germans. They already did. The words hit the camp harder than any shouted speech could have. Some soldiers lowered their heads. Others stared at the ground. Nobody argued. Because deep down, everyone understood exactly what he meant. Patton wasn't rewarding surrender. He wasn't rewarding Germany. He wasn't rewarding the enemy. He was rewarding character. And in war, character often appeared in the most unexpected places. That evening, headlights finally appeared on the distant road. Supply trucks. Hundreds of crates. Food. Coffee. Bread. Meat. Medical supplies. The entire camp came alive. Men rushed to unload vehicles. Laughter returned. Energy returned. Hope returned. But nobody forgot Patton's order. The first meals went to the prisoners. Exactly as instructed. Otto Klein stood holding a steaming bowl. For a moment, he simply stared at it, as if he couldn't believe it was real. Then he looked toward the American soldiers. Several nodded back. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The gesture was enough. Hours later, American soldiers finally sat down with full meals of their own. The atmosphere felt different now. Lighter, calmer, stronger. Private Mercer spooned hot stew into his mouth and closed his eyes. 3 days of hunger disappeared in a single moment. Across the camp, soldiers talked quietly. Not about battles. Not about tanks. Not about victories. They talked about 6 potatoes. They talked about an old German prisoner. They talked about a decision that nobody expected. And they talked about Patton. Because what impressed them most wasn't his authority. It wasn't his rank. It wasn't his reputation. It was his ability to recognize humanity even when it appeared on the opposite side of a war. Years later, many of those soldiers struggled to remember specific firefights. They forgot road names. They forgot weather conditions. They forgot countless military details. But they never forgot that week. They never forgot the hunger. They never forgot the prisoners. And they never forgot the moment Patton chose principle over pride. World War II was filled with battles that changed history. But sometimes the most important moments happened far away from gunfire. Sometimes they happened around empty dinner bowls. Sometimes they happened during silence. And sometimes they happened when exhausted men remembered that being human mattered more than being enemies. Because war has always tested courage, but it also tests character. Anyone can show strength when life is easy. The true measure of a person appears when everything is gone. When food is gone. When comfort is gone. When hope feels distant. That winter, a group of hungry prisoners made a choice. A group of hungry soldiers witnessed it, and a general ensured nobody would forget it. Long after the war ended, the lesson remained. Humanity is not weakness. Compassion is not surrender. And dignity does not belong to one flag alone. Even in the darkest moments of war, people still have a choice. They can become consumed by hardship, or they can choose something better. On a freezing day in 1945, a handful of potatoes became proof that humanity could survive even where war tried hardest to destroy it. What would you have done? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more World War II stories where humanity, war, and difficult decisions collided, make sure to subscribe.